My name is Ava Mirelle, and if you met me years ago, you would have never believed who I truly was or what I carried behind the perfectly curated smile and expensive illusions. I wasn't always free. I wasn't always speaking truth. For a long time, I served darkness, not by accident, not unknowingly, but willingly. I walked into it with my eyes open because I thought it was the answer. I thought it was power, security, a shortcut to everything life had denied me. I thought I was choosing control. But the truth is, I was chosen as prey long before I realized I wasn't the master. I was the offering. People think demons only want your soul. They think the spiritual world only cares about morality or belief. But no one ever told me the part I wish everyone knew, the part religious people ignore and the part occultists don't want exposed. Demons want your destiny. They want your influence. They want access to the areas of your life that shape identity, your finances, relationships, confidence, opportunities. Because if they can steal those, you will never rise into who you were meant to become. The devil doesn't destroy you by scaring you. He destroys you by getting you to surrender piece by piece while thinking you're gaining something. I didn't wake up one day and say, I want demons in my life. No, it started with curiosity, a hunger for more, a quiet bitterness toward limitation. I grew up watching others succeed while I struggled. I saw people with connections, wealth, and open doors, while everything in my life felt locked, distant, impossible. And somewhere along the way, I started believing the lie. Maybe the universe has favorites, and maybe I'm not one of them. When someone finally whispered a path promising power, independence, and manifestation without waiting, praying, or hoping, I listened. At the time, I didn't realize that desperation is one of the easiest soul entry points. When you want something badly enough, darkness doesn't need to chase you. You walk straight into its hands. And I did. I walked right into it with the confidence of someone who thought they were taking life into their own grip. I loved the idea of controlling fate, money, opportunity. I loved feeling chosen, initiated, trusted with knowledge most people weren't worthy of. That's how they get you. Flattery first, chains later. People imagine the occult as rituals, sacrifices, dramatic scenes. Sometimes it is, but most of the time it's subtle. It feels empowering, beautiful even. Candles, symbols, ceremonies, whispered confidence. At first, nothing felt wrong. In fact, everything felt shockingly right, like my life was finally accelerating. Money flowed, opportunities appeared, people treated me differently. I wasn't invisible anymore. I felt magnetic, and that feeling is addicting, because the moment you taste power without effort, without patience, without surrender, your soul stops questioning the cost. But deep inside, beneath the excitement, something started shifting. It was small at first, barely noticeable, like a quiet tug in my spirit, a discomfort I ignored because I didn't want to confront it. Something told me you didn't gain, something gained you, and that's where my real story begins. Not in the rituals, not in the power, but in the moment I realized that the very forces I thought were helping me were silently draining me, financially, emotionally, spiritually. They weren't giving, they were negotiating. And everything I thought I owned suddenly felt borrowed. And that's the part no one warns you about. I was 19 when it happened, old enough to believe I understood life, but young enough to be easily led. It began so casually, almost innocently, like a doorway disguised as curiosity. Her name was Celeste, the girl who first pulled me into that world. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. She walked into every room like she already owned the air people breathed. Her clothes weren't just expensive. They carried an energy, a presence, something that made people stare a little too long. She had the kind of confidence that wasn't taught. It radiated, like she knew secrets the rest of us weren't allowed to hear. And I admired her, maybe even envied her. One afternoon after class, she caught me staring, not in embarrassment, but with a knowing smile, as if she had been waiting for that moment. She sat beside me, close enough that I could smell expensive perfume mixed with something else, earthy, sweet, almost intoxicating. She studied me for a second and then said, "You have potential, Ava, but you're blocked." No introduction, no small talk, just that. And as strange as it sounds, I felt exposed, like she saw a part of me I had never spoken aloud, a part that wanted more. She invited me to a gathering she called a manifestation circle. The way she said it made it sound exclusive, powerful, like an opportunity most people wouldn't be trusted with. I remember nodding before my mind even processed the invitation. I told myself it was harmless, just a spiritual practice, something alternative, something bold. I convinced myself that successful people were simply willing to do what others refused. The meeting was held in an old Victorian house on the edge of town, beautiful from the outside but strangely silent, like the walls were holding their breath. Candles lined the hallway, guiding us inward. Everything felt intentional, curated. The darkness, the smell of incense, the dim lighting that made shadows look alive. The women there weren't chaotic or strange. They were polished, successful business owners, artists, influencers. Their presence was intimidating, yet strangely welcoming. They spoke about energy, alignment, breaking generational lack. It sounded exactly like everything I had always wanted. At the center of the room sat a black bowl and sheets of black paper. Celeste told us to write what we desired, not what we needed, but what we were owed. That wording struck me. Owed. I wrote one sentence: financial security. Not success, not wealth. Just enough to not feel like I was constantly drowning. We burned the papers one by one. As the smoke curled upward, they whispered phrases, words I didn't recognize, but they felt ancient, familiar in a way I couldn't explain. My heart beat faster, not in fear, but in anticipation. It felt like I had tapped into something powerful. Celeste leaned toward me and whispered, "You just made your first agreement. You'll see results soon." And she was right. Within weeks, my life shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. Unexpected money, opportunities, attention. It felt like proof, like I had unlocked a secret path. But I had no idea that what I thought was a blessing was actually the beginning of captivity. At first, everything felt like confirmation that I had made the right choice. My bank account started growing, not dramatically, but noticeably. Random refunds appeared, unexpected raises, clients who previously ignored me suddenly wanted to work with me. It felt effortless, as if the universe finally recognized me. But the thing about darkness is this: it never takes everything at once. It feeds you just enough to earn trust, then slowly collects payment in ways you don't notice until you're already drowning. The first shift was subtle, an invisible heaviness. I started waking up feeling drained, like I hadn't slept at all. I told myself it was stress or late nights, but deep down, I knew something had changed. My dreams became strange, vivid, dark, filled with shadows, whose faces I couldn't see, but whose presence felt overwhelmingly real. Sometimes I heard whispering before falling asleep, like someone standing inches from my ear, speaking a language I couldn't understand. Instead of being afraid, I convinced myself it was just spiritual activation. Money was coming in, but just as quickly it started disappearing. Not physically at first, it slipped away through unexpected expenses, a broken phone, sudden medical costs, fines, car repairs that never seemed to end. Every time I tried to save, something happened that forced me to spend. It didn't matter how much I earned, the balance always dropped back to almost nothing. At first, I blamed coincidence, but after a while, the pattern was too precise to ignore. And there was something else, something I didn't expect. My emotions no longer felt fully my own. I'd get waves of anxiety for no reason, followed by bursts of false confidence so strong it bordered on arrogance. And every time I considered stepping back from the rituals, a voice in my head whispered, "You owe us," not accusing, not angry, just certain. When Celeste asked me to attend another ritual, this one more advanced, I didn't hesitate. I felt obligated, not because she pressured me, but because part of me believed I had entered into something binding. The circle was smaller this time, more intimate, the atmosphere heavier. They talked about maintenance, how spiritual power requires continued exchange. That word stuck with me, exchange, but I didn't question it. I just followed. We repeated the process, intentions written, fire consuming them, chants spoken in unison. But this time something different happened. A wave of heat moved across the room, not from the candles, but like a silent force. My vision blurred for a second, and I felt something press against my body, soft, unseen, and undeniably real. It wasn't comforting, it wasn't loving, it felt like claiming. That night, when I returned home, I found my wallet on the floor, open, though I knew I'd left it zipped in my bag. Cash was missing, not all of it, just some. Enough to confuse me, not enough to panic. I told myself I was being forgetful, but deep inside, a quiet truth whispered, "The exchange has begun," and I didn't stop it, not yet. Looking back now, it's almost unbelievable how many warnings I ignored. The signs weren't hidden, they were right in front of me, but wrapped in just enough deception that I labeled them as spiritual progress instead of danger. The very things that should have alarmed me only pulled me deeper, because by then I wasn't thinking spiritually, I was thinking transactionally. If I cooperate, I gain. If I resist, I lose. And that mindset was already proof that something had begun to take hold of me. The first sign was exhaustion, not normal tiredness, but a draining heaviness that clung to me no matter how much I slept. Some mornings it felt like something had been feeding on my energy while I slept. I'd open my eyes with a sense of dread for no logical reason. Even simple tasks felt overwhelming, but strangely, whenever I engaged in rituals or meditation linked to the occult, a surge of confidence and adrenaline would return, almost like a reward. Then came the nightmares. Every night I found myself trapped in dark corridors or staring into mirrors where my reflection didn't quite match me. Sometimes I saw shadows standing over my bed, never moving, never speaking, just watching. The worst part wasn't the dreams, it was how real they felt. I'd wake up gasping, convinced someone was standing in the room, but when I turned on the light, nothing was there. Still, I could feel it, a presence, patient and possessive. And then there were the objects. My wallet vanishing, then reappearing in the exact spot I swore I checked. Jewelry going missing only to show up days later somewhere impossible, like inside a closed drawer I hadn't opened. Little things moved when I wasn't looking. At first, I laughed it off as forgetfulness, but deep down, I knew it wasn't me. Financial chaos became its own kind of haunting. Every time I tried to save, every single time, something unexpected happened. Overdraft fees, fraudulent charges, sudden expenses that appeared out of nowhere. It felt orchestrated, almost timed. I'd receive money only to lose it within days. But instead of questioning the rituals, I blamed myself. And that was another sign. My thinking had shifted. Doubt was replaced by obedience. Emotionally, I became someone I barely recognized. I swung between superiority and insecurity, peace and panic. There were days I felt invincible, untouchable, as if shadows themselves bowed to me. And other days I felt hollow, disconnected from everyone and everything. People around me noticed. Friendships faded. Family relationships grew tense. I'd snap over the smallest things, then isolate myself, convinced no one understood me anymore. And the whispers, those were the hardest to explain. Sometimes just before sleep or right upon waking, a voice, not imagined, not internal, would speak, not full conversations, just phrases. Keep going, don't stop now, you're protected. And strangely, it felt comforting, like guidance. I never once questioned what was guiding me. All the red flags were there, glowing like open flames, yet I walked past them as if nothing was wrong. Because by then, the rituals weren't just something I participated in, they were becoming something that owned me. And I didn't realize how deep I was until it was far too late to pretend nothing was happening. The breaking point didn't arrive like a dramatic scene from a movie. It crept in quietly, the way storms sometimes begin, not with thunder, but with a shift in the air you can't fully explain. I didn't suddenly wake up and realize I was enslaved. Instead, I slowly noticed that my life no longer belonged to me. The rituals were no longer optional, they felt demanded. The presence I once thought was protective began to feel supervisory, watchful, territorial. I wasn't partnering with something, I was being monitored by it. My relationships were the first casualties. Anyone who questioned my involvement or noticed changes in me mysteriously drifted away, or I pushed them away without understanding why. I lost friendships I'd had for years. Family dinners became tense and uncomfortable. My patience vanished, replaced with irritation that flared at the smallest things. Sometimes, when someone confronted me, even gently, the anger that rose in me didn't feel like mine. It was cold, sharp, and ancient. When it passed, I'd feel empty and confused, like I had watched myself from somewhere far away. Then came the collapse of everything that had once felt like reward. The job raise that felt so miraculous? Gone. The clients who suddenly wanted me, they disappeared just as fast, many leaving without explanation. Bills multiplied, bank errors never resolved in my favor, money moved through my hands like sand, impossible to hold, impossible to track. I had gained financial increase, yes, but I had never received financial security. That was the trick. I was meant to be dependent, always in pursuit, never fulfilled. Spiritually, things escalated. The dreams became full encounters. I stopped seeing shadows at a distance and started feeling them near me, breathing beside my bed, brushing my hair, whispering my name. The presence that once felt welcoming now felt possessive and suffocating. I'd wake up paralyzed, not metaphorically, but physically unable to move, while something pressed against my chest with an authority that made my soul tremble. I stopped sleeping properly. Nights became battlegrounds instead of rest. The worst moment, the one that shattered the illusion, happened during what I thought would be just another ritual. We gathered again, but this time everything felt heavier. The air seemed thick, like a room filled with heat without any source. As the chanting began, something shifted in the room, something unseen but unmistakable. A voice, not from a person, but from the air itself, spoke, deep, ancient, and unmistakably directed at me. You belong to us. Those words echoed through me, not just in my mind, but in my bones. Every hair on my body rose. My breathing stopped. For the first time since stepping into that world, fear, real, primal fear, cut through the haze. Not fear of the unknown, but fear that I had already been claimed. That night, after the ritual, I walked home, trembling. Everything around me felt distorted. Streetlights flickered, shadows looked too solid. My phone died even though it had been fully charged. When I reached my apartment, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt occupied, like something waited inside. That was when the war truly began, not the war for my safety or my sanity, but the war for my identity. Because something in me, something buried deep under fear and deception, finally whispered back, "No, I don't belong to you." And that whisper, small as it was, threatened everything darkness had built around me. The moment I whispered, "I don't belong to you," everything around me shifted, subtly at first, but unmistakably. It was as if something had heard me, something that wasn't used to resistance. For nights after, the air in my room felt heavier, the shadows darker, and the silence unbearable. Sleep became a battlefield. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt a presence looming, watching, not with curiosity, but with ownership. There was this growing sensation that I had broken an unspoken rule, that I had stepped out of line, and whatever held me wasn't willing to let go quietly. My body reacted before my mind fully understood. I woke up with bruises I couldn't explain, finger-shaped marks around my wrists, scratches down my back as if something had dragged claws across my skin. My heartbeat never fully returned to normal. It lived in my throat, constantly waiting for something to happen. I tried grounding exercises, crystals, sage, everything I had been taught, but none of it worked. If anything, it made things angrier. One night, after another suffocating paralysis episode, I stumbled into the bathroom shaking. I stared at my reflection, eyes sunken, skin pale, spirit drained, and I barely recognized myself. I didn't look empowered, I looked possessed, hollow, owned. And then it happened, my breaking moment. Still trembling, I grabbed my phone and searched online, not for spells or rituals, but for something I had avoided for years: deliverance testimonies, people freed from darkness, people who had walked paths I now realized mirrored my own. I found someone, a woman, speaking about spiritual bondage, about hidden agreements, about demons stealing purpose and prosperity. Every word pierced me with uncomfortable familiarity. But one sentence changed everything. Darkness doesn't fear crystals, chants, or rituals. Darkness only fears authority. Something inside me broke. Something deeper than fear. Something ancient in my spirit that had been waiting, suffocating under deception, rose. For the first time in years, I spoke, not to the universe, not to energy, not to spirits, but to a God I had ignored and even mocked. "Help me," I whispered. "If you're real, help me." The moment those words left my mouth, something violent happened, not physically, but spiritually. The atmosphere in my room shifted like two kingdoms colliding. I felt rage, not mine, radiating through the space. A cold wind swept across the room, though the windows were closed. My lamp flickered aggressively. My breath shook. I wasn't speaking to emptiness. Something heard me. Something hated that I had called for help beyond its reach. The days following that prayer were a war. Nightmares intensified. Strange knocks echoed in my apartment. My thoughts weren't just intrusive, they were weaponized. I heard whispers telling me I was foolish, unworthy, doomed. Some told me to return to the rituals. Others told me to end everything altogether. But something had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. Every time fear clawed at me, I prayed, even if my voice trembled, even if I didn't know the right words, even if part of me doubted anything was listening. Slowly, things began to shift. Sleep returned, not all at once, but in fragments. The presence grew weaker. The paralysis stopped. The whispers became distant echoes instead of commands. And then, one morning, I woke up and the room felt empty, not lonely, free. There was clarity in my chest, air in my lungs, peace in a place peace hadn't lived in years. That was the moment I realized escape wasn't a single instant. It was a surrender, a battle, and a reclamation. And what I had reclaimed first was myself. Even now, years after the darkness tried to claim me, I can feel the weight of that world lingering, not in my body, not in my mind, but in the echo it left behind. The truth is, the war never fully ends. It only changes sides. I speak freely today, yes, but I also speak with a warning forged in the heat of real experience. What I survived could have destroyed me. What I survived could have taken my money, my influence, my destiny, and if I had lingered in denial a single day longer, it would have. Every person reading this has choices before them that feel small or inconsequential, but they are far more powerful than they realize. Every handshake, every whispered promise, every subtle compromise of values is a potential doorway. Every time you let fear, greed, or impatience guide your steps, you are handing over a key you may never get back. The entities that operate in the shadows, call them demons, call them spiritual parasites, call them what you will. They are not defeated by ignorance, denial, or polite dismissal. They are defeated by authority, by clarity, by courage, and by an unwillingness to surrender what is divinely yours. They are drawn to hesitation dressed as ambition, dressed as opportunity, dressed as spiritual shortcut. They thrive on the illusion of gain, the seduction of power that costs you your life piece by piece, your purpose fraction by fraction. And while the world around you teaches patience, tolerance, and compliance, these forces operate on a different currency, submission. They calculate, strategize, and wait for the precise moment when your vigilance falters. One wrong choice, one lapse in discernment, and they are in quietly, invisibly, devastatingly. I learned that the cost of such compromise is not always immediate. Sometimes it is subtle, invisible, like a shadow sliding into your finances, your confidence, your relationships, your dreams. Money begins to vanish, opportunities dry up, your influence erodes, and you are left wondering why your life, despite effort and talent, never rises. That is the quiet work of spiritual theft, a deliberate, calculated, invisible theft that preys on ambition, hope, and desire. And when the realization finally comes, it can feel too late, but it doesn't have to be. Freedom exists, power exists, destiny exists, but only for those willing to confront the invisible forces that would claim it. The truth I speak is not theoretical, it is not hypothetical, it is carved from nights of terror, mornings of despair, and moments when the weight of unseen eyes pressed upon me with unrelenting force. It is forged in the fire of experience, in the reclaiming of what was mine to begin with. And here is the undeniable reality. Those who refuse to see, who refuse to understand, who refuse to take ownership of their own lives will be quietly diminished, drained, and reshaped to serve something that was never theirs. The stakes are higher than money, higher than comfort, higher than social status. The battle is for your very purpose, your vision, your ability to walk into the future you were meant to claim. And while the world applauds patience, compromise, and conformity, there is a cost that no one talks about. It is a cost that is often paid silently, invisibly, and irreversibly until someone finally wakes up and decides to fight back. I survived, and now I speak, not to shock, not to scare, but to illuminate what many refuse to acknowledge. I survived to tell you that your wealth, your influence, your destiny are not guaranteed. They are vulnerable. They are constantly under siege by forces you cannot see but can feel if you know what to look for. And the question is no longer theoretical, no longer distant. Are you aware? Are you vigilant? Are you willing to confront what is quietly consuming the life, purpose, and future that should belong only to you? The answer is yours and only yours. The consequences are immediate, undeniable, and irreversible depending on the choices you make. The shadows are patient, but your life is not. So I ask again with urgency and clarity carved from experience that almost broke me. If darkness can steal what you cannot see, what would you do to reclaim what is rightfully yours?